All right, so in this first unit for government, what we're looking at is really the Constitution. And way to think about the Constitution is this is the rules that we're going to play by. If you've ever played a game with somebody, right? One of the first things you do when you get that game out of the box, the first time is that you read the rules, right? So you know how you're supposed to play. And so that's really what the Constitution is it's the rules that we're supposed to play by. But what we want to look at though is how we got there, right? This didn't just come out of nowhere. There's a build-up. There's a process to this document to getting to where the Constitution is going to be. And so we've got to go back to a period of time before 1776. And I'm sure you remember from your U.S. history that before 1776, the 13 original colonies that are going to become the United States were British colonies. Right? They were under control of the King of England, of Parliament, and so everything that they did was regulated by the mother country. The people of these 13 colonies would have been British citizens, and so as such would have paid taxes to the king, would have um, been under his rule. Now I took the picture that you see there from the right from the Broadway show Hamilton. If you've ever got a chance, it's a great show to see. I think it's on actually it's on the Disney Plus now. So if you've got Disney Plus, you can see the original group of folks. But my favorite guy in the whole thing of Hamilton, and he shows up two or three times throughout the show, is the King of England. And in the show, he plays it kind of goofy, right? The guy is definitely overacting as he is being the King of England. But this would have been the guy that was in charge, and King George was the guy who was in charge of the British colonies. Now, what we're going to see as we start to look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is an awful lot of the ideas that the American colonists are going to come up with, that the founding fathers are going to come up with, um, are in response to things they didn't like very much about the government of England and being under the control of Parliament and a king. But why 1776? Right? These colonies had been here for decades before there was ever any kind of indication that they might rebel and want to go out on their own. Well, if you look back in the history again, pre-Revolutionary War, there's a conflict called the French and Indian War. And it wasn't actually between the French and the Indians, it's between the French and the British. And Native Americans from that time, some were on Team France, some were on Team Great Britain, but it becomes known in our history as the French and Indian War. And it actually took place out in kind of our area of the country. An awful lot of the fighting is going to happen a little bit up to the north of us in Michigan, places like that. Where a lot of the fighting is going to happen. But basically, the idea was who's going to control the territory here in what would be the Midwest. Britain and France were no strangers to fighting against each other, of course. They didn't need a whole lot of excuse to do that, but this is just kind of the next problem or the next conflict in line with that. And so once that war is over with, the British are looking for some way to pay for all the debt they've accumulated. And they looked and basically said, hey, we've been fighting over here for the safety of the American colonies. We think the colonists ought to help foot the bill for what's going on. And so they start to pass taxes on these people. And you guys have heard these stories before. Taxes on stamps, taxes on tea, which kind of leads to the Boston Tea Party, all of those things that are going to be taxed. Well, nobody likes taxes. One of the things we'll talk about, I'm sure, plenty of times over the course of our time together is how nobody wants to pay taxes. We all like this stuff that the government does for us, but we don't necessarily want to pay for it. And so the colonists kind of seize on this idea that Parliament and the king are putting these taxes on us, but they don't get to send anybody from the colonies over to be in Parliament. And so the slogan kind of pops up: no taxation without representation, right? We want to have a say in Parliament if they're going to tax us. So Parliament's really kind of who they are attacking. The king in England at this time is pretty much a figurehead. I mean, there's some different things that he does, but Parliament's the one making these laws, levying these taxes. Um, and so, but it's a lot easier to go against one guy, right? Say this is the villain, this is the guy that we're going to go after. So, what they decide to do is they decide to send what I like to refer to as the most important breakup letter in history, and it's called the Declaration of Independence. We all know about the Declaration of Independence. We celebrate its um, adoption on July 4th every year. That is our Independence Day, even though it wasn't actually officially signed until the middle of August. So hold off on buying those fireworks and get them at the buy one get seven free sale that starts on July the 5th. But Thomas Jefferson and a committee are going to sit down. They're going to write the Declaration of Independence, and in the Declaration of Independence, they set out what they see as the purpose of government. And the crazy thing is, they're going to set out an idea that's a radical reimagining of the role of government in our lives. Um, for most of human history, right, the people have been looked at as being there to serve the government, right? If you've got a monarch, if you've got a guy who's the king, right, the people are there to make the king's life easier, to be in his army, to grow his crops, to pay his taxes, right? And the king's got a responsibility. He's supposed to keep everybody safe, and he's supposed to be working for the betterment of the people. But for the most part, that king is looking out for himself. And so there are a couple of ideas in the Declaration of Independence that are going to go against that. First of all, Thomas Jefferson is going to write, and he's going to say the power of a government comes from what he calls the consent of the governed. I want to encourage you to pull up the Declaration of Independence and read those words. It's a little hard because it's not the way we talk and write today, right? This is being written hundreds of years ago. But just this idea that the power of a government comes from the people. It doesn't come from a monarch who was destined from birth to be king. It doesn't come down from somebody God put in charge. That power doesn't come from above. It comes from the people. The people give a government its power, and that government is supposed to do a couple of things for them, right? It's supposed to give them the opportunity for kind of living their best life. It's supposed to give them the opportunity to live in as much freedom as possible. And it's supposed to get out of the way and let people do what fulfills them and makes them happy. And this is a radical idea in 1776. The idea that the government is there to serve the people. And that's the way we like to look at it today, that the people we elect are there to serve us, to look out for our interests, to make our lives better. And being a politician, being an elected representative, should, at least according to the Declaration of Independence, be a call basically to servanthood, that you're doing what you can to benefit your fellow man and preserve those things for them. And so that's the idea of the Declaration of Independence, right? That the power of a government comes from the people, right? And here in the United States, we're going to elect our governments, and that government is supposed to be working in the people's best interest. And they basically say in the Declaration of Independence, King George isn't doing it, right? King George, like I said, means Parliament, but they're not doing it. And so what they do is they cite 27 different reasons why or how the government of England has not been doing this for the American colonists. And they basically say, we're breaking up with you. We're out of this relationship. Now imagine, right? You've probably been broken up with before or broken up with somebody before, maybe even both. But if somebody broke up with you, kind of the first thing we want to know is, well, what are you breaking up with me for, right? What did I do wrong? Now, a lot of times maybe the person gives us a reason or two, but imagine if that person pulled out a piece of paper and said, here are 27 reasons why I'm breaking up with you. That's not going to go over real well, right? You're going to feel bad about that. And so the Declaration of Independence leads to, obviously, the American War for Independence. Um, Now, once that war for independence is over, right? Once the Revolutionary War's gotten over with, it sounds weird, but almost the easy part's done, right? You've beaten the British, right? You've taken care. You've told the king, basically, take your crap to the other side of the ocean. We're not dealing with you anymore. But now you've got to come up with a way that you're going to govern yourselves. And so it's easy when you've got kind of a common enemy. Man, everybody hates that guy, King George. Let's all be on the same team. Once he's gone and you've got to start figuring out how you're going to get along, things can get a little more difficult. So we're going to have a written form of government. And so representatives from the 13 colonies sit down, they hammer out a document that's called the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation were adopted in March of 1781. And basically, a confederation is just kind of a loose alliance between the 13 colonies, or what they'll become known as states. Basically, if you think about the Articles of Confederation, these are 13 different countries that are joining together for mutual protection and interest. But really, every state is looking at themselves kind of as a country unto themselves. And there are some problems with the Articles of Confederation. They're not even going to last a decade. Um, but it's like it's kind of the first written form of government, and then we're going to look and say, well, hey, we could do some things better. They couldn't have an army, and so a government without a standing army doesn't have very much power. Each state was supposed to have a militia, and if the government asked for soldiers, the states were supposed to send them, but there was no way for the government to enforce them sending those troops if they asked for them. They didn't have the ability, the Articles of Confederation didn't give the federal government the ability to levy taxes. And so without taxes, that means you don't have any money coming in. And so if you don't have any money coming in except what the states are giving you kind of out of the goodness of their hearts, you don't have very much power either. So no army and no money is going to be a big problem. The other thing is, for something to be passed um, through the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states had to agree to it. Now, I don't know if you've ever gone out to eat with 3 or 4 of your friends, but if you have, you probably know what a pain in the butt it is trying to figure out what restaurant you're going to. Now, imagine you've got 13 different countries spanning from the northeast of the United States down to Georgia who are trying to decide on something that's good for all of them. Now, with the Articles of Confederation, they all had to vote yes on something for a particular law to be passed. And again, it's just hard to get people to agree. It becomes pretty clear, right, to a lot of these founding fathers, a lot of these guys that had fought in the Revolution, that this isn't working. We know from history that there are a lot of letters being exchanged between these guys, and a lot of them are running through Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. And so basically in 1787, these guys are going to get back together in Philadelphia, and they're going to start with the idea that they're going to improve the Articles of Confederation. But pretty quickly, they're going to figure out that's not the way we need to go. We need to do this whole thing over again. And so, less than 10 years after they've finally kicked the British out, they've looked and said, hey, we didn't do a very good job with this first form of government. Let's do something else. And so you've got the Constitutional Convention of 1787. They're going to come back into the same room where the Declaration of Independence was authorized, and they're going to start to hammer out the Constitution of the United States. And so we're going to take a look in a lot more details of what kind of the Constitution is. That's really what we're going to be following for this whole semester as we look at U.S. government. But it all starts here with the Revolutionary War, throwing off England, starting with the Articles of Confederation, which is kind of this first form of government, and then eventually moving to our Constitution, which today is the oldest written form of government in the world.